It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Now, some of you probably remember, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think some of you probably remember the debate over whether or not Brett Kavanaugh was fit to be on the Supreme Court. And that outraged a lot of people to see, what happened on the left, what the left did to Brett Kavanaugh's reputation, and how we completely threw out this idea that you are presumed innocent until you're proven guilty, and there's got to be proof, right? So just because somebody says something or makes an allegation, that doesn't mean anything unless we actually have proof. But, the left in this country, they wanted the ends justify the means. They just didn't like the fact that they weren't in control necessarily of who was going to sit on the Supreme Court next. At least that's the way it appears to me. But this idea, it's not something that has just, come up overnight. The idea that you are not innocent, until proven guilty is something that's been, happened for a while now. Okay, this is kind of a growing epidemic in this country, and we actually have on the line somebody who has firsthand knowledge of this happening to one of her family members. I want to introduce you to Renee Jolly is on the line. Renee, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Paul. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And so I'd like for you to just tell your story. You're the parent of a son who was falsely accused by a female student. What tell us about that? Right.
So he was falsely accused and ultimately expelled for sexual assault. And my son's university is still under investigation by the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, for the way that they handled my son's case and his ultimate expulsion. But what we've learned in this experience is that, the school actually withheld evidence from his case in order to find him at fault on the university campus. And they also moved away from due process on the university campus for two reasons, really. The number one reason was, or the first reason was that in 2011, the Department of Education under the Obama administration sent out a Dear Colleague letter to the institutions, university institutions across the United States, stating if they did not clamp down hard on sexual assault allegations, they ran the risk of, or so they thought, of losing federal funding. So there was intense pressure on universities, including my son's, to show that they indeed were taking these accusations seriously, even if it meant wrongly expelling an innocent student, which in my son's case, based on the evidence that was discovered, they did. And then the second thing that they did was what you were alluding to with start by believing, that they use techniques to start by believing the accuser, but when you do that, you in effect are presuming guilt on the accused. And so you get these investigators, and these were campus student conduct investigators, who developed a belief early on that my son was guilty. And so when you have that mindset, you're far more likely to look for anything that assumes their guilt and confirms that preconception, rather than looking at evidence that counters that belief.
Yeah, so instead of start by believing, maybe you just should start by listening, and then you should move on to the investigation phase after that, right, Renee?
Absolutely, yes. There's he said, there's this he said, she said, but you have to look at the evidence, what the evidence shows. And in my son's case, there was very, very specific evidence, including eyewitness statements from even the girl who accused my son, from her friends, who cleared my son's side of the story, or corroborated his side of the story. Yet the school chose to leave that off of the final investigation report, again, because of the pressures they were under by the Obama administration, and the fact that their training really ensued on this Start by Believing. And Start by Believing really is a mission. It's a global campaign described as, on their website, as transforming the way we respond to sexual assault. And it's well-funded to the tune of $9 million over the past 8 years by the Department of Justice. and it's under the umbrella of End Violence Against Women International, which is a laudable cause to end violence against women, because for too many years the pendulum had swung over to where women did not feel that they were being adequately believed, and their claims were not being investigated. But the problem is we've now swung the pendulum the other way, but you can't really fix one problem by creating another, and that's exactly what we've done.
Well, I guess I wonder, because it just dawned on me, it's an odd campaign titled "Start by Believing." So, if women tended to not be believed, I'm curious as to why. I mean, I don't think necessarily. I think stereotypes exist, for example, because a lot of times they're reinforced every day, and that doesn't mean you need to interact with people based on that, because that's wrong. But people have ideas of notions. So there are false claims out there, right? I mean, that's the only reason why you would have to have a campaign about sexual assault against women called "Start by Believing." If there are people that don't believe it, it may be because there's a lot of instances where someone is claiming sexual assault that it didn't actually happen. Now, I mean, I don't mean that to be offensive, but that's just logically where, what do you say to that, Renee?
Yeah, I completely agree, because why should we believe women any more than we should believe any man? It's, it's an outgrowth of Me Too. This movement says we must first believe all women's allegations of sexual harassment, but then we forget about the presumption of innocence, or the possibility she could be unbelievable once the evidence was reviewed. So Start by Believing is scary. It's really moving us away from our constitutional protections of presumption of innocence. It's leading to very biased investigations, and it's convicting innocent people, because this campaign is not only being rolled across the university campuses, it's also being rolled out to criminal justice professionals across the United States. But yet there's been quite a bit of backlash from criticisms to this type of training. From the U.S. Air Force is denouncing this type of training, saying that it's not a good or fair method. It's being denounced by the Governor's Commission in Arizona, stating the same, that they do not want it rolled out across their state. So it's scary, but yet people are jumping on the training that is available, and it's not good for our country, and it's not good for the rights that we have constitutionally protected.
So the left is putting this out. You got to believe women. Now, I will tell you this: that you can believe men, but only if you are Jussie Smollett and you're a gay black guy at 3 a.m. Then you will be believed for a time, at least, until the scam kind of just is exposed to everybody. But we're talking with Renee Jolly again. Her son was wrongly accused and then kicked out of school. I got this written here, Renee. A national survey found that 1 in 10 persons reported they had been falsely accused of sexual assault, domestic violence, or child abuse. Then 2,382 exonerations have been documented to date, representing nearly 21,000 person years lost. False accusations and perjury are a leading contributor to wrongful convictions. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so those are accurate numbers, and the first thing that comes to mind when those are read is just how sad it is that these people have lost so much of their freedom and their protections, and that's really, again, a testament to why it's so important to have unbiased, thorough, and fair investigations. That police detectives take an oath, and they're expected to conduct investigations like that, and they're based on principles of honesty and impartiality. But when you move away from that type of fairness, you are going to be taking away a lot of life from these people, and it's wrong, and it needs to be stopped.
You mentioned earlier, or I think you mentioned earlier, $1.4 million right now the U.S. Department of Justice is sending to this Start by Believing campaign. Is that right?
Yes, that was actually just in the past year or so.
Wow.
Since 2011, it's been nearly $9 million. And we we've gone against their and sent letters to the Attorney General, William Barr, asking him to stop the funding for these sham Start by Believing trainings. Because it's under the umbrella of End Violence Against Women, and the Department of Justice is a vast department, we are trying to bring awareness to him on really what they're funding, because he may not have any specific idea on what is being rolled out.
Gosh.
And, their training material, it's online, it's available for anybody to see. And basically, it tells in the training material, it tells the participants to conceal inconsistencies in the complaint and statement to minimize the risk of contradiction. It tells them to make sure the sexual encounter does not look like a consensual sexual experience. It tells them to slant the investigation report to focus on evidence that serves to corroborate the victim's account. And your listeners are welcome to go on a website to view this, and that would be going to saveservices.org. That's Save Stop Abusive and Violent Environment, services.org. And they can read this, and they can also click on a link to sign a petition to support stopping this type of training.
I think they definitely need to, Renee, and it's strange. I guess last question, it is strange to me. You're on this program standing up for fairness and standing up for due process when it comes to trying to determine whether or not a crime has been committed. And isn't that odd? I mean, what does that say? What do you think the end game is? Because obviously this is about an agenda. You don't try to change this concept, this sacred concept of that you're innocent until proven guilty, unless there's some sort of end game, in my opinion. I mean, I know it's a speculative question, but what do you think about that?
I scratch my head as well. Why, as a country, we have moved away from the tenets of constitutional protections. We are calling people victims or before they've even been proven to become a victim. And, whether someone's a victim is a conclusion to be made at the end of a fair process, at the end of an investigative process. It's not an assumption made at the beginning, but yet that's exactly what we're doing. And it's what we see happening in the media right now with Joe Biden. He's basically living in the world that he helped create around what is sexual harassment or what is consent. And, that's a whole other show for you.
No, it really is. And I think the difference is, I mean, if there were videos of, like, Brett Kavanaugh making little girls extremely uncomfortable, you actually had evidence. I mean, the thing with Joe Biden is, he's living in a world that he created, but there's also video evidence that just makes, I think, a lot of people very uncomfortable.
Right.
But anyway, okay. Well, Renee Jolly, I appreciate it. I'm so sorry what happened to your son, and I wish you guys the best, and thank you for using what's obviously something that's negative in your life to try to change it, to make it positive in the end, and make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else.
Oh, you're welcome, Paul. Thank you for having me on
right.
this morning.
Renee Jolly, everybody.